live, everybody. It's okay. This is all for the patrons.
Everything that we've said about the Soros family, we mean every last thing we said.
Oh, boy.
Well, here we go. I think we actually are.
Yeah, and this is what... Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Break the Rules. I am your humble host, Lev Polyakov, and I am here today with the great and powerful Curtis Yarvin, finally in the BTR NYC studio, along with the amazing Vlad Davidzon right over here. And we are going to be talking about these incoming new elites, the red team, or however, Curtis, you would want to call them, kind of, the coming to a head of a lot of the things that you were writing about for a while. So we are going to go for it right now. And once again, thank you to all the patrons, and especially a big thank you to the live audience over here, made up of patrons and friends and great supporters of the show. Give yourselves a round of applause, everybody. So, yeah, let's just start. Curtis, thank you for coming in here. And let's just get a little bit of a breakdown for those who are living under a rock who do not know the work of the great Curtis Yarvin. What would you fundamentally say was the thing that you wanted to see, back in 2009? And are you seeing it with what's going on right now? And that could be like a good place for us to start. Everybody subscribe, like, click the bell. Patreon.com/breaktherules. The patrons see it first. So, Curtis, go ahead, my friend.
No, I don't really see anything, but what's encouraging is that people are at least kind of LARPing it a little bit. When you look at American sort of politics, there's always been this, sort of amazing detachment between the discourse of what government actually is and what it does versus what we're talking about when we talk about it. And so, it's just like one of the many things that blows my mind about, the present political narrative is the fact that I don't think anyone on the campaign trail mentioned the word COVID. Barely, if at all. Right. And it's just like, so it's such an indication of the ritualization of that structure. Now this kind of new element has really entered the narrative, and the element that has entered the narrative may owe something to me, but I think its time was generally coming around, which is an element I'm really indebted to the wonderful 1920s German writer Ernst von Salomon, who... he had this great line where he's like, well, the kind of German general I'm really tired of is the kind who marches right up to the Rubicon and then sits down to fish. And so, this sort of process of fishing in the Rubicon and basically getting people riled up as though Donald Trump, on January 20th was actually going to, ride into Washington on horseback or something and do like a Mussolini. People kind of voted on that basis, which is really strange. They both had those thoughts in their mind. There was this front page of the New York Times op-ed that's like, Trump says he will X, Y, Z, W. And then the bottom is, believe him. And I'm just like, well, I'm offered the interesting...
Believe women.
Well, yeah, believe women is one thing, but it's a really odd message, don't you think, to be reading in the New York Times, believe Trump. I'm like, basically, Trump wants me to believe Trump, the New York Times wants me to believe Trump, and all I can think of is Trump steaks. Right, and I'm like, Trump University, right? Actually, I'm like, what's strange is I seem to be the only person in America who doesn't believe Trump. I don't believe he can do anything.
No, but sorry, I'm sorry, Curtis.
Yes.
The fact that you put your finger on something, as usual, very, very incisive. Mm-hmm. The fact that the New York Times had to tell everybody, no, really believe him. He really is just a buffoon play acting at being a fascist. He really is a fascist, even though he's actually a golfer and like ADHD incompetent.
Yeah, did Hitler play golf? Hitler didn't have time for golf. Right.
Right.
No, it's a totally different phenomenon.
The New York Times had to beg people to say, no, really believe him. And I saw the thing in big letters. It was like, no, believe him. but it's the inversion of the of the famous joke. I don't let my students footnote Zizek in their talks, but it is the one good thing that Zizek ever.
Give us the joke. We need to hear the joke.
The joke is this is an inversion of a great Zizek joke. Is Zizek says I may act like a madman and tell you I'm a madman and. Everyone thinks I'm a madman, and I believe I'm a madman, and I smell like a madman. But don't be fooled, I really am a madman. This is the exact opposite of it. Donald Trump, everyone tells you he's a fascist, and the New York Times says believe him, he's a fascist because we believe he's a fascist, and he believes he's a fascist. But don't be fooled, no one actually believes he's a fascist.
Yeah, and the thing is, people did not respond after this election as though either side believed he was a fascist.
Right.
Nobody is scared of being rounded up. Nobody wants to everyone is just they've normalized this process of fishing in the Rubicon. Now there's just everybody's getting their fishing license, right? And it's still you're just that's an interesting sort of pause because normalizing fishing in the Rubicon gets you a lot of people who are hanging out around the Rubicon. They're like, what is over there? There's some, what's behind those trees, right? And so there is an effect in which normalizing this process has an effect. But the thing is, every time you sort of look at this and you're just it's like the first moment, from going way back to 2016, which is before most of you were born. 2016, one of the ways I reacted to the utter insanity of 2016, where nobody really expected him to win and then whoosh, right? And everyone was just like, what the hell is going to happen? They really expected some kind of very discontinuous transition in something, which of course was not in any way, shape, or form possible. And now they basically are just everybody's sort of trying to get themselves hard to care about this, but they really just don't. And they can tell that, this thing is actually not real, and there's going to be this posturing, there's going to be sort of whatever. That creates sort of an interesting opportunity in a way that creates more of an opportunity to do things for real in a sense. At the same time, you had a comment, sir?
Well, a couple of things. Yeah, I did have. You and I don't disagree on this at all. There's kind of this weird way in which the left, the progressives, the nice people of the New York Times who say believe the show that we are putting on in tandem with him. Believe us as we just strive to believe that he's actually the fascist that we want him to be. Well, he doesn't have the discipline or the intelligence or the interest of being himself. Not that I want him to be more of a fascist, but but there's this weird thing that the progressives are demanding that we, in order to fight this incipient threat of the blonde beast and fascism, have to walk away from the liberal norms and values in order to fight this.
Are we getting back to foreign policy here, Vlad?
Yeah, no, but not foreign policy, internal liberal policy. Well, let me just finish that thought. Yeah. And Trump, while projecting fascism, is actually in many ways a return to classical liberal things, on free speech and all sorts of stuff, right?
Trump is, I would say, he's a genius, of course. He's a performer. He has a considerable reserve of common sense, and he has a kind of he is megalothymic, I think, in a healthier way than people sort of normally expect. He's proud, but not in a way that totally deranges his functioning. Right. It's it is the pride of a king. It's basically, and so he has the confidence and the common sense and the pride of a king, but I don't know that he has particularly many of the other skills. But the important thing about, how essential it is for a king to be proud is that can create a sort of default path for the preservation or even the creation of sovereignty. Because the thing is that basically, even when you have someone who is not in any way, shape, or form disposed to cross the Rubicon.
Right.
He can still find himself or even put himself in a situation where the only way that he can, and Caesar, obviously a very different kind of individual.
Caesarism.
There are Caesarisms, right? But did he ever say like many such cases?
Like a vulgar like
Yeah.
like as like an Eastern European snob, echt elitist. This is like Caesarism of like an American way, like
With the Hulk Hogan being kind of like the barbarian that they
100%.
imported in.
There
Kid
you go.
Rock, Hulk Hogan, World Wrestling Federation. This is not aesthetically my thing. I'm sorry. Like
I understand that.
Yeah.
You're very, yes.
I'm a product of my culture, just as he is also.
You are, but we are barbarians, right? And Caesar, of course, crosses the Rubicon because he's forced to. He has to basically win to avoid, prosecution. They got him on a morals charge, right? And I'm just kidding, but it was some bullshit.
Can I tell you like the one time in his entire life that Donald Trump behaves in a gentlemanly and courtly fashion by moving corporate funds to pay off his mistress so the wife doesn't find out. The one time that he behaves in a truly elegant manner.
Vlad, I can tell that you have never mind.
I myself have done this. I was like what they were going after. It was like what the man is just moving around corporate funds to pay off the girlfriend so his wife doesn't. Who amongst us? I've done this. Like this is the one time. Like the liberal elites. The one time he behaves like a gentleman should.
Yeah.
A gentleman of the old. This is what they get him on. I'm just saying. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I know.
I get worked up. I'm sorry.
I know.
You get verklempt.
Yeah, it's outrageous. It's absolutely outrageous. But even more so, I can see from your position as an Eastern European ledger. But in any case,
But maybe the concern for the deep state people is not even Trump himself, as it is the blonde beastness of the lumpen proletariat, that they're seeing these people right now. They're thinking, okay, if they're going to accept Trump, what's next?
well, they have a lot of ways of dealing with the Trump and Reich. It's a relatively crude assailant from their perspective. But the thing is, I think more what happens, one of the things you'll see libs do is
Can we just call them progressives over like you? I mean, you and I keep arguing about this, but like,
yeah, progressives is good, and call them what they call themselves.
Yeah.
When I say libs, there's something ironically, maybe it's a little too clever. I'm being a little self-deprecating because I'm basically painting myself as a sort of unsophisticated Fox News hick who would say libs. But then I say libs anyway, right?
And you actually mean libtards.
And I mean, and so there are multiple layers of like class condescension,
right.
And pretension in there. But many people will just miss it because they don't have enough class, right? But
I know that you and I really disagree on whether the lib progressive distinction is actually real, and I know that culture is over, and I know that the technology has killed it. I know that
it's all the same thing.
I know it is. And by the way, I know at this point that that's true, and yet I still wince when people say shit libs, even though I hate them. I still wince.
Really?
I would like to think that something like classical liberalism of the kind that I, as an Eastern European, I know you're totally right. I know this is
maybe we could call them piss libs.
Piss libs, yeah.
The classical liberal is it's the piss lib. Okay.
Yeah, the piss lib against the shit lib, right?
Going to
I know very well in my heart of hearts that distinction, if it ever was real, and I know you as a heterodox historian of things that I care about in 1910s and 20s and 30s will say it was never a different thing, but it certainly was a thing during the Cold War and the post-war Cold War consensus.
Of course.
And I know no one on the right now takes that distinction seriously, but yet.
I was a Cold War liberal. I have some respect for that.
Okay.
That frame of mind. I have nostalgia for being a Cold War liberal. Like you remember the Cold War,
I was there, but speaking of a Cold War, I think what we should state unequivocally now is that the Cold War consensus concluded at 8 p.m. on November 5th, 2024. We've been talking about, the lack of purpose of this country that's floating, where we were going. What is the consensus? I think the final nail on the coffin of the post-Cold War consensus concluded ideologically, temperamentally, culturally, in terms of institutional support. No one believes in this stuff anymore, and this became obvious a week and a half ago.
So you think Marco Rubio would be like the American Shevardnadze, maybe?
Yeah. Okay. 80%, 90% of the people listening do not know who the Georgian foreign minister of the Soviet Union was, who became the first president of the independent
of the newly independent Florida Republic.
Georgia, Florida. Yeah. If the jokes write themselves, if only people had enough cultural context to know what you're talking about. But
I know I'm so lazy.
I don't think they're going to be international liberals or neocons or isolationists. We're in for a new American consensus. We're skipping to foreign policy a bit quicker than you and I anticipated, but these guys are, there's going to be something new. I don't know what it's going to be called, but it's not going to be neocon, it's not going to be liberal, it's not going to be interventionist, it's not going to be isolationist, it's going to be a new, uniquely Trumpian system of American-led. You used to call it the American-led liberal world order. It's not going to be that anymore. It's going to be like the Trump leading something.
Well, one of the things I always say, if there's one thing I try to get people to understand about the political spectrum when they come in with this typical American liberal attitude of seeing left and right as somehow symmetrical.
Right.
Nothing could be more asymmetrical. And when we look at what right is, left is a thing, but right is not a thing. Right is the absence of that thing. So, for example, what would you say one typically right-wing idea is? For example, racism. Okay, racism is not an idea. Racism is the absence of an idea.
Well,
And yeah,
I wouldn't. By the way, I'm one of those liberals who attacks the progressive, who say that the entire conservative and right is like intrinsically racist. Like actually,
I know, I understand this is not, to say that right is the absence of left doesn't mean that you don't have all of these rightist phenomena.
Because I believe racism is ultra right. Like I believe racism is the definition of ultra right, and I as a liberal. I don't think there's any such thing as racism. It's not an idea. It's the absence of an idea. Fine.
And one way you can see that is, here's an interesting point. You know when the word racism dates to in common usage, right, Vlad?
1800s?
30s.
American 1930s?
American 1930s.
Like the American 1930s. Is that,
yeah.
The idea of racism is 100
Even that
years.
word, yeah. Racialism is slightly older, but you do not see it used in the 19th century.
No, but if people talk about the races, the Hebrew race.
Of course they did. They talk about races of pigs as well, right? It's just a word meaning breed, essentially. And
Taxonomy,
actually, I was reading this thing from early imperialist dialogue from 1904 or something, and it talked about the conflict between races. And so races were understood. It was racism that was not understood. So in this piece that I was reading from like 1904 about the future of South Africa, about the conflict of races in South Africa, they identified the conflict of races in South Africa as the conflict between the English and the Dutch race, the Jews not having yet arrived. Let's take the word television. Okay, is anyone using the word television before 1900? No. And here's why. There is no such thing as a television before 1900. Now, here's what's interesting. Is anyone using the word racism before 1900? No. But is that because there is no such thing as racism before 1900? Definitely not.
It's a deep human thing.
If we were to take a modern racism detector and apply it to the world before 1900, it would pick up a lot of different kinds of racism, possibly kinds of racism that have gone extinct and that we don't even have anymore in this world, right? And so actually, this is what's puzzling, is that basically, there are two reasons why you don't use a word. Mm-hmm. Either no one is a racist before 1900, the same way no one has a television, or before 1900, everyone is a racist. And given that everyone is a racist, you suddenly you're like, wait a second, what if actually when I look at the Google engram of the word racist,
right,
I'm looking not at a phenomenon, but at the basically inverse set of some new faith that has just been created. It's like if you're a Muslim and basically you have a word that means people who doubt Muhammad, right? Again, before 500 AD, everyone is a person who doubts Muhammad.
Right.
Right, because Muhammad hasn't even been born yet. Right,
there was no Islamophobia in Catholic Spain in the 1700s. Everyone was by modern standards an Islamophobe.
Exactly,
right,
exactly, and very radical too. And so when we look at basically the real history of ideas around this word racism, what we see is that in fact we're watching the birth of a new doctrine. And that is the new doctrine of equalism as taught by people like Franz Boas in the Columbia University School of Anthropology, and all of these people that sort of attempted to reinvent this very 18th century doctrine of the tabula rasa, and all human beings being born and somehow identical above the neck or something like that. And so, what we see is that if we sort of flip from positive to negative, and we forget this word racism, which is not actually a valid word, and because it's what so there's this great sort of subfield of biology called cladistics, which is the study of like genetic evolution, and they insist that you basically, in anything that's a family tree, and this applies to languages, and I would argue traditions, religions, cultures as well. One classic error is what's called, a negative predicate. And so if you have a class that says this is the class of animals that do not fly, that is not a real class of animals. The class of animals with wings that includes both bats and birds. I think it's a wastebasket classification or something. There's some term for it. It's like basically this is a false classification. When we basically, instead of studying this phenomenon called racism, which had always been around, but nobody had ever needed a word for it, and then it becomes the most important thing in the world. If we just actually treat it as racism, not as a faith, but as the absence of this new faith, and suddenly you're actually tracing the growth of equalism, the faith, or for example, eugenics is another word like this. There's no such word, there's no such thing as eugenics. There's only like dysgenics, right? And
there was no such thing as eugenics before we had the biology of the 1930s.
No, there was no such thing as eugenics because nobody actually believed that all human germplasm was in some abstract sense equal.
There were breeding experiments all throughout history.
Animals. People
also.
But there's also this recognition that when you cut people open, they have some of the same parts as animals, and so there's a lot of like lessons you can take from animals to people and vice versa.
100%, right.
Basic,
basic stuff, but yeah.
Basic stuff.
Sometimes you have to say the basic things.
Sometimes you have to say the basic things.
Because nobody believes them anymore.
Yes. So we're I think it's a little too easy to say that we're entering a new world or seeing a revolution or anything like that. I am old enough that I remember seeing 1989 on television. I remember seeing people climbing on top of the wall. And now actually it's amazing. It's actually almost opposite in that, in a way. It's like actually nobody cares. And there's something cool about the fact that like nobody cares, or like, it's so hard to imagine. It's almost as hard to imagine the like level of like Trump resistance fanaticism that we remember from 2017 as it is to remember COVID.
Oh, that's going to come back.
Well, there were a lot of sad faces that I saw of, lots of young women that were walking around, and they just looked visibly upset. This was the day after election. But as far as any kind of protest, there was one anti-deportation protest that was going on around the Times Square area, I believe. So when it comes to the actual policies being implemented, let's say deportation with that guy who kind of looks like a wall himself, what was his name? Homan, I think. When that happens, do you anticipate there being any kind of, great resistance to it? And do you even think it's going to happen?
Biltong.
By the way, this is brought to you by Anton's Biltong in Roanoke, Texas. Curtis, what do you think of the Biltong so far?
It's pretty good.
It looks like dog food, but it tastes great.
It's great, and it's actually, the thing about this Biltong, which may be true of all Biltong or maybe just Anton's Biltong, is that it's a little like jerky, but it's softer and juicier than jerky.
We like it.
Yeah.
And you could choose the level of juiciness, by the way. It could be like wetter, it could be drier. Yeah, sausages, a lot of good stuff. Right. So guys, if you go to antonsusa.com and type in code word BTR10, you're going to get 10% off and free shipping and all that. So do that. Patreon.com/breaktherules. Support the show. Anyway, Curtis.
Right. Straight out of Central Casting, he reminds me of like the gunnery sergeant from Full Metal Jacket. And I don't know if you know the story of that guy was actually the technical advisor for the film, and then they're just like, screw it, let's just cast him as the DI. And then he went on and had a career playing that role. Okay, so Tom Homan, great job, great performance, some great lines. He's playing the board Czar. Do you know what a Czar is?
It's side. It's like Caesar. It was the Russian term for king.
Do you know what a Czar is in Washington, D.C.?
Oh, yeah, of course I do.
What is a Czar?
I'm a creature of Washington, D.C.
Yeah, what's a Czar?
Even though I despise it, I really hope... By the way, I just hope Donald Trump burns Washington, D.C. I know. I'm just sorry.
I get it.
I'm sorry.
What is a Czar?
I work...
Sir. What is a Czar?
A Czar is a unelected but appointed head of a grandiose political program. So we'll have a Czar.
Head of. So what is he the head of? Who reports to him?
It will be an intergovernmental thing. It will be like a zomboid mission.
Do they work for him in any sense? Are they his employees?
No, this Czar will be put in charge of an intergovernmental program.
Let me translate this. Yeah. Let me translate this into English. So a Czar,
yes,
in the federal government is someone who, I don't exclude that this person can have an impact on the government. However, the funniest thing is that, of course, Czar, you're both right. Czar in Russian history symbolizes an autocrat.
Mm-hmm. From the word Caesar.
From the word Caesar. Right. Someone whose decisions are absolute and cannot be overturned. Czar in the U.S. federal government means exactly the opposite of that. It means someone who has no direct reports and only dotted lines coming out of his office. It's someone who basically has a power to do two things. One is issue a report and press conferences, and two is to he can call people. He can call people, and I believe he can call meetings. I believe he has like one of those Zoom subscriptions, so he can call meetings, right? And of the people who he is supposed to be in some abstract sense directing.
People like
that. Yeah, he's got them on speed dial, right? So the speed dial, that's a real thing. That's a real thing, right? The speed dial.
So he will convene possibly a meeting of people of power.
That's right. And in this meeting, they will meet. There will be notes, probably sandwiches and some notes. I just want you to remember that the important thing about the Czar position
is
the sandwiches.
But with the Czar on the war on crime.
When we're looking at...
the war on drugs.
Yeah, which
we won.
Few of us remember the war on drugs. The idea that Americans ever even used drugs is so foreign to us, and yet we remember before war was yeah, exactly, right. So the drug czar, I think, was...
Or the war on poverty, also a czar.
Yeah.
So these are all wars that we won, obviously.
Exactly.
Am I making your point for you?
America loves the form of autocracy.
Right.
Implied in the word czar. In any case, basically, Trump finds a dude who's old-fashioned border patrol motherfucker, like probably committed a number of abuses of his authority. I'm gonna go straight out on a limb. Looks like the warden in Cool Hand Luke. You put him on TV in a cowboy hat. It's great. Dude isn't even the ICE commissioner. Okay, now. He's a czar, right? And which means he actually has no power at all and can't do anything, right? And you're literally like, this guy's he's gonna. Now, the thing about, ICE or, there's certain parts of the federal government for whom the formal purpose for which they exist and the job that they actually want to do are the same thing. And ICE is one of these things, right? And so, this idea that basically, in a way, this area is something of an exception to the way I normally describe this problem, because, I want to get, say, NASA to be more effective at its core mission of spending $25 billion a year to build cool space shit. There's no way you can say, okay, let's just unleash NASA. I don't even know what that would mean. But, unleash ICE, I think it's fairly clear what that would mean.
Let loose the dogs of war.
Yeah. Just like kind of a Judge Dredd, really, approach to deportation, where individual ICE agents, even when off duty, can issue deportation orders.
Even in their sleep and when they're making love to their wife, they're like, wait, sorry.
They comes into the room, or
Sorry, sweetie, I have to just deport this immigrant before I finish you off.
Deport your wife, but it's like, yeah.
But how would they physically be able to do it? Would they be able to go into a home and arrest poor Abuela and her grandkids, and because he wants to take all the families and bring all the families together and take them out?
You cuff them all. You wait for the van. If they try to move away from each other, you have you can cuff the cuffs to each other.
And you don't think we'll have some powerful fifth column from the people that are going to be resisting this?
Of course there will be.
No, I think they'll be deported as well. I think that especially if you relax. The thing is, here's just one thing.
Some of them are American citizens.
As a devil's advocate perspective,
right.
Okay, I think conservatives have spent a lot of time talking about how it's not a piece of paper that makes us American. It's our shared American values. And I don't think they understand kind of some of the radical implications of that perspective. Right? Because really, if that's what defines an American, then basically I think it's just obvious that anyone who doesn't share those values You see what I'm saying, right? It's not about biology. It's not about racism.
Citizen, would you deport me?
You share my values, right?
Like I'm an elitist. You don't like that. Like I don't like
disorder, chaos.
I love chaos.
Well, in the bedroom, but not like in public.
In the bedroom. In his love life, he loves chaos. In the sheets, he wants the chaos. On the streets, no chaos for Vlad.
Angel on the streets, devil in the sheets. Absolutely, yeah.
No, okay. So, but a few things that normatively, descriptively, not prescriptively.
Can you bring me a piece of the pizza over there? I will eat on camera.
Yeah, I don't mean to shill one more time here, but BTR patrons, $20 plus patrons, they get all of this delicious food over here, all this pizza and wine. Look, we have red wine, and we have White Claws in the refrigerator later for the roof gathering. So this is what becoming a 20 plus patron, patreon.com/breaktherules gives you, okay? Where else are you going to get this? This is the middle of Manhattan, and this is what's going down.
Is it the case, and I say this as an immigrant, whether I was assimilated in my head or I still think like other Central Asians like Borat, who doesn't want to be one of the annoying, obnoxious immigrants who are like, now that I'm inside the country, I'm closing the door behind me. Those people are obnoxious, right? They are. There's nothing more unseemly than being an immigrant who says, now that I'm an American citizen, it's not. It's a vulgar kind of thing that I don't want to be, and yet. Now about 15% of Americans are foreign-born, now that the assimilation matrix is broken, now that we have third world invasion, arguably at the southern border.
Vlad, I'm just I want to close the border. Jose, I want to close the border.
Okay.
We friends.
The border will be closed. Elections do have consequences. That's fine. The good people of America, the good people in the southern states want to close the border and say, we need to assimilate some of these immigrants and let their grandkids become American and watch more Hulk Hogan and Kid Rock. And
Dragon Ball Z especially. Mexican people love Dragon Ball Z.
Yeah. We want them to become the good kind of Americans who love Kid Rock and Dragon Ball Z and eat pizza, right? We want that. But so, fine, the border is going to be closed, 100%. We can close the border, even if that leads to inflation, and the cultural stuff outweighs the economic stuff, obviously. And yet, can the society survive, and is it even necessary to try to test it by going around and trying to deport 12 million abuelas?
The concept of society is so strange in reflection to the United States. We can't even picture the concept of a society. There's no society. There are little atomized classes with friend networks, less modernized cultures. There are sometimes weird family clan things or mafias or churches.
We haven't dissolved those yet.
We haven't dissolved those yet, but only because they're kind of beneath our ken in a sense. Yeah. But this is not a society. This is a bunch of rows in a database. Yeah. Once you acknowledge that America is a bunch of rows in a database, you're, I think, led in a very different direction. You're just if we're going to be a bunch of rows in the database, first of all, call me crazy, but I feel we should at least have the database, right? And so, what just strikes me as utterly whack is that we live in a country whose government does not know how many people are in the country to within 10 or 20 million.
6 Latvias and an Estonia.
That's right. Which are superior, Latvians or Estonians? Like, just as a stereotype.
I prefer Estonia because we went there on vacation in the dacha back when we lived in Russia. It was very nice. They had great food there. I'm sure Latvia is not bad either.
But Estonia feels more modern.
Well, Estonia is absolutely more modern. Estonia is like the most...
Why is that? Why is it? Because it's the farthest east.
Latvia got a surge of a lot of Soviet, Russian immigrants in there, and I think that also, did the opposite effect.
Why do the Ukrainians call the Russians orcs?
Because they were subjugated by the Golden Horde, by the Mongols for a long time, and that really fucked their brain up.
There is a DNA thing with the orcish blood.
Well, I mean, we're going deep into racism here, I have to tell you.
It's Slavic racism. Is a different kind.
This is Slav on Slav racism.
It's not racism, it's culturalism. And you could say, well, what's the thing between those two? But if you were living in this life where you were treated like a farm animal for like generations and generations by the nobility, then no wonder you're going to be so screwed up.
But if they're making the same mistake, was there no basis for that?
No, not at all. This was just the Mongolians treated Russia as like one giant human breeding machine, which is, by the way, another reason why
that's
the
why
orc
you
thing
see
applies.
some slanted, some Mongol traits creeping into the facial features.
I'm of Mordvin descent myself. I'm a Viking Jew. I'm a Mongoloid Viking Jew.
But what we were talking about, Curtis, earlier, I think it is a good thing to judge people according to their culture versus things they have no control over. Because if you're somebody who happens to be from, one racial group versus another, there's nothing you can do about that, but there is something you can do about whether or not you can fit into society based on your actions.
Well, when you say fit in, that made me think of something else, which is that there's a thing that's sort of, in a way, in between the things that you can control and the things that you can't, that people don't usually like to talk about. But there was a line, she's a singer, Azealia Banks, in fact. And Azealia Banks...
Who's this?
Azealia Banks, a singer, a musician of some kind.
Pop?
I don't know. She may have studied with Zizek, I'm not sure. But in any case, she has this beautiful, and it's really a linguistic line. It's kind of a postmodern line in some ways, because it's sort of, how does the speaker comment on the speech, right? And what she says, and it's certainly been my experience that this is true, is, she's basically like, when you're fat, anything you say just reminds people that you're fat. and I think that's it's a very postmodern statement, and I found it to be true, and that's basically, and in the times of my life, I mean, I'm not exactly svelte, but in the times of my life when I've been really, frankly, fat, before I started the, I mean, I basically have noticed, I'm talking to someone, and I can tell that all that they're hearing is not my ideas, but simply that I'm fat. And that was maybe it's a midlife crisis thing. I don't know.
No, a lot of people post-COVID have been going through this transformation. I mean, look at Lizzo. She used to be the exemplar of fat pride, and now she's working out, and she's minding her garden, so to speak.
What is she down to?
I don't know. You guys, could somebody look up what Lizzo's current weight is for the official?
Who is this?
Lizzo. Curtis, how would you explain Lizzo?
I just like
she's a very heavy black female rapper.
I don't care about rap. Is this because I've been living in Europe for a decade and a half? They're new famous people.
In Europe, they care about rappers also. I hate to break it to you.
I know. I despise the fact that we've exported American rap to my
country of Ukraine. I know.
Everywhere. you go to the gym in Paris, and I come up to them and I say to them in French, if I wanted to listen to rap while I worked out, I would have stayed in Brooklyn, and they laugh and they turn it off. You have to do this. It's everywhere, and I don't.
Oh wait, hold on. Here.
Yeah.
Somebody grab this because I think Cassidy wants to reveal the weight of Lizzo.
She lost 440 pounds.
Wow.
It doesn't say what her weight is now, but she lost 440 pounds.
I don't believe that. That's incredible.
Thank you.
She weighs 240 pounds, according to...
So she was 600?
No way.
So she was 800 pounds.
That's powerful. And this is only moments from happening. Like, basically, like, imagine if AI, this conversational AI is coming, right? And if you've heard of one of the newest trends in AI is, I believe it's called RAG, or retrieval augmented generation.
Right.
And so basically what I want is an AI where I can basically just say the name of a woman. Maybe she's famous, maybe she's not, and it will give me a rating. Like, it'll be like, oh yeah, Lizzo, she's a 4.5.
What is the applied usage of such a technology?
I want to know. I don't know. Like, I mean, everybody has a primary key. If you're familiar with database technology, Vlad, everyone has a primary key for every database in their head, right? And so basically, for example, in terms of like set classification, you could classify Lizzo in terms of American musicians, or, African-American woman, or, 3.5s, and so like it's sorry.
And do you think that this culture is also going away of the fat pride and all of these things related to? No? You think it's here to stay?
The aesthetics of the Obama era of America. This is a good question. Now that Trump is back and is going to obviously reshape America and American culture in wide-ranging ways that we are going to start figuring out what they are soon, is the cultural deluge, the cultural whatever of the last 10, 12 years, has it been pushed back? Is it going to change? Have those norms have it solidified? Like, what is it? Just, are we going to live like we used to?
It's an interesting question. Certainly the vibe is not really on the side of, some of the sort of the dogmatism and applying party lines of the 20 teens looks a little bit silly now, which is kind of a nice, it's never like a matter of like a truth and reconciliation, campaign. And often if you were unlucky enough to be purged, you stay purged.
Right.
But there's still a sense of like, well, we did that, right? And I'm conflicted in some ways, because I think there are arguments for either prediction of the future. And so there's one argument that says the ideologies that became mainstream in the 2010s had been marinating, as you and I know, being cultural experts, Vlad, for a very long time in the culture, easily 100 years,
50, 60 years. I mean, we don't need to argue about that, but these are long tail effects.
Deeper than that.
Okay, fine. Fine. We're not doing intellectual history now, but these are long-term effects of long-term cultural...
Easy to find before the war. And for those out there who want to check this statement, there's a wonderful... I found this in a review by Wyndham Lewis, a great artist and writer.
Great fascist, also. I'm just saying.
This is from his essays called The Art of Being Ruled, which is published by, of all publishers, Black Sparrow Press, the publisher of Charles Bukowski. And
no contradiction whatsoever.
No contradiction whatsoever. I'm sure Bukowski admired Celine, right? I'm sure, I don't know if he read Wyndham Lewis, but I think he would have liked Wyndham Lewis. Anyway, so... but he definitely liked Celine, which you're not supposed to like Celine, because...
But so go ahead.
In any case, Wyndham Lewis has this wonderful review of a book by W.E.B. Most people would say... How would you say the name of W.E.B.?
Griffith.
No. That's D.W. Griffith. It's spelled D-U-B-O-I-S.
Dubois.
No. Du Bois.
Why isn't...
Because he's American and not French. Okay, you say Pinochet, it's Pinochet. And
am I terminally foreign?
I don't know, but you're wrong. Okay. In any case, there's this review of this book by W.B. Du Bois, which is a novel,
right,
called Dark Princess, and it is full of the most outrageously bad, almost quasi-pornographic, anti-colonial, just a half-baked anti-colonialism from 1928 or something like that. proto-anti-colonialist. Like, of course, it's Marxist anti-colonialism from the 20s. Like, it's not that unusual. But the fact that it's Du Bois is somewhat hilarious. And also, it's just, like, really bad, you know? And so, basically...
But somehow important for intellectual history or not at all?
Yes. Very much so, because
Okay.
it demonstrates how old the shit is. And Lewis writes about it in several books. He in Art of Being Ruled and Paleface, he really saw cultural Marxism, really, as some call it, you know, developing in the 1930s. It's very powerful. In any case, you know, this is a very old thing, but what happened, and of course it's very easy to see, to find it in the 20s and 30s, you know, you have to actually have something of a clue. To see it in the 60s and 70s, you need only a smattering of knowledge. Everyone talked about it in the 90s and so forth, and it spent a long time growing and coming to maturity, you know, sort of the way a cancer does. You know?
Succinctly, 2 sentences. What is it?
Gay race communism.
Gay race communism.
Gay race communism.
That's 1 sentence.
It is. It's actually a fragment of a sentence.
Identitarian gay race communism. Gay race communism.
And well, it's actually a slight cleanup of a Bronze Age pervert neologism, but gay race communism will do. The use of basically the fundamental trope of communism, whatever you want to call it, in the 19th century, it's always, you know, the fundamental trope of this, of leftism as a whole, is the use by the aristocracy of the, you know, the underclass, the Untermensch, you know, as a club against the bourgeoisie. And it is that alliance of high and low. There has never been a socialism that was genuinely a movement of the low. And so in the 20th century, in the middle of the 20th century, you see basically the shit libs switch barbarians, and they go from the like barbaric lower classes, the working class who they discard, and they go from there to the even more exotic foreigner, the migrant.
The workers are revolting. Yeah. They certainly are.
Exactly. And if you thought the workers are revolting, right, you know, and so, you know, and that's where basically, and anything revolting will do. And that's where gay race communism comes from.
In the 1930s, in that book that you personally recommended, having to do with, what was his name, about Stalinism in the United States, Red Decade.
Red Decade. Did you read that one, Eugene Lyons?
Yeah, really enjoyed it. Eugene Lyons.
Eugene Lyons.
Yeah.
Jew.
So in that book, for those who don't know, it was about how the intelligentsia became ardently not just communist but Stalinist during the 1930s. And also I recall there being a passage about how women started having sex with black dudes as a way to rebel, you know, against their staunch father. So would you say that, like, that period's kind of like when...
Oh, sure. I mean, if you read one of the books that I like to recommend is there's this writer, John Dos Passos, very famous American novelist.
Socialist who became right-wing.
That's right. He dropped out of the party. And after he left the program, after he went to Spain with Hemingway, and he was like, eh. And Hemingway was like, this is fucking cool. And Dos Passos was like, no, actually, I don't really see it as cool, right? And so he broke with the party. And the books he published after that were barely published. Like, if you buy the Washington trilogy, which he wrote after that, after his like famous USA trilogy, you buy them to this day from Amazon. Okay, this was like 15 years ago.
Yeah.
You get pirated OCR editions.
Why?
Okay, because he got completely unpublished.
He got canceled.
Yeah.
The cancellation of his time.
Yeah, yeah.
You were like a proper socialist, and you're like, no, actually, I'm an American hick. Actually, I love hickism.
Canceled. And you know, so he wrote these 3 tremendous books about basically the American political scene. They were number 1, which is kind of about a Huey Long figure, The Grand Design, which is about the New Deal, and Adventures of a Young Man, which is about American communism. And my God, the hipsters you meet, the communist hipsters you meet in Adventures of a Young Man, like, they could live in San Francisco now. They live in the same ways. They have the same kinds of, like, you know, degenerate practices. Like, the drugs are not as strong, you know, but it's just the same fucking people.
As a libertine, I like degenerate practices. I just don't like the communist stuff.
I understand that. I do understand that.
Okay.
Right? You know.
All right, fine. I'm just saying.
I think we've, you know, yeah, I I understand your perspective. There's a cost, there's a benefit.
You respect my
We
perspective.
have both paid the cost, right?
We have
we have
absolutely
both paid the cost, right?
No, but-
Gay race communism.
Okay.
Gay race communism has been a thing in America
For 120 years. 120
but the
years.
thing is, it had never quite really burst the bounds of the elite and become mandatory for like second graders in like the Des Moines school district. And not only mandatory for the second graders, but mandatory for the principals, mandatory for the teachers. It had not basically, nobody in the 20s would have believed that you could make gay race communism go that mainstream, but you could, right? But the problem is that once gay race communism goes mainstream, its energy as a signifier of like, we believe this, and like, mommy and daddy, you could never believe this because you're not that cool, but we, believe in gay race communism. The only thing that's left that has anything like that kind of energy is trans.
Right.
And that's because it's so hard. It's just so...
Because it's so insane and so weird and so
Yeah.
counter to everything that a common sense person from any society would think. Like the normalizing the most radical version of trans psychosis. And has to be the most radical version for all sorts
I
of...
think you see like the priests of Kybele, in the Roman Empire who castrated themselves. Like there's precedents, like
100%,
mainly in the Roman Empire, to be honest. But like,
There were precedents also in the early Soviet... So again... We agree on what happened. We agree more or less on the timeline. Let's say 2009, 2010, Obama plus the new technologies plus the collapse of a...
Well, it was like punk going mainstream. After punk goes mainstream, in a way, there can be no more punk.
Right.
And like basically, like the fact that it was going mainstream and the fact that these like extremely dire ideologies became, essentially mandatory among all civilized, cultured peoples to the point where basically if you even basically agreed with the things that Barack Obama went around saying on the 2008 campaign trail, the only job you could keep 12 years later with those ideas would be a job as a manual laborer. And even then, that might not be so secure. Right. And so it's really...
Not that there's anything wrong with manual labor.
No, or with men manually marrying other men, who may of course be laborers, right? And
not to belabor the point.
Not to belabor the point, but we're not getting into the rough trade here, not this early. But the speed of that, it's like when I read 1984, the book, as a kid, there's just certain things in it that's just like you're just. Come on, like we've always been at war with East Asia. Like, come on, you can't actually do that, right? And then I saw things like the thing that really sticks to mind is like the COVID flip, where we were supposed to not be afraid of COVID, and then we were supposed to be afraid of COVID within like the course of like a week, and people just like forgot that they were like going out and tweeting, "Oh, you need to go to Chinatown and lick doorknobs," and now it's like basically you need to like sequester yourself, like the bubble
not
boy.
just that, but when you had the BLM protests, all of a sudden, you could gather in all these large quantities, and you wouldn't
But
get...
only if you're a BLM protest.
Yeah.
And no other kind of protest.
It stimulates the immune system to fight for freedom, right? And especially when it's other people's freedom, right? And so really, like in a way, my point is you can sort of take this two ways. And one way is that basically there's a natural swing back from this effect in which basically gay race communism is sort of written into the Constitution and becomes part of the fabric of our nature. One of these ideas previously considered like outre, like the idea that, say, like if you look at, for example, the popularity of interracial marriage in the U.S. between 1950 and 2000. Okay, in 1950, there's a vanishing percentage of like probably the most liberal perspective that you get on international. They want it to be like, as they say about abortion now, they want it to be safe, legal, and rare. Okay, right? And that's and everyone else is just like
I see where you're going. And then we keep moving the goalposts for liberal.
Moving the goalposts.
And then
so the thing is basically eventually you get to the point where I
Where even discussing gay marriage makes you like some sort of barbarian.
Sure. And the
Right.
real question is basically in 50 or 60 years, it becomes the question of like, do we voluntarily extinguish the human species to like cleanse the earth? And so you get like really explicit, like heavy, like Jonestown stuff, and it gets really wild.
Do you think the patterns of the last 8 years will be drawn down just a little bit in the coming 4 years?
What do you mean by drawn down?
Not fashionable anymore? Would that be a good way of putting it?
It's like you sense, you can't imagine doing George Floyd again. You can't imagine George Floyd 2.0. It's just really hard to sell. It really got worked very hard, and it's like very, very tired.
Members of the old regime are presented with a choice. Are we going to get red pilled, or are we going to get black pilled? Are we going to get blue and yellow pilled? He's presenting me with this moment where the old regime is about to leave, and in 2 months we will have a radical new regime.
I think you're being very optimistic about the blob, being dissolved.
Or about my own career prospects.
It gets harder, but you always, it's like you don't surf.
Is it better for me
You
to
don't
jump
surf.
ship?
You don't surf.
I don't. I'm a
You
Jew
don't
from
surf.
Central
You
Asia. We don't surf.
So the thing is, when you're surfing, I'm not a good surfer. I'm a terrible surfer. But the thing is, when you're surfing, you're waiting.
Right.
There's a lot of waiting for waves, and often you'll see a swell coming. You're like, this is the one, and then it like turns out to be like bullshit, and you're just like waiting. It's like, and it doesn't even break, right? And then you're just like the waves have gone down, and then the classic surfing moment, and then
I'm waiting for
you see a line on the horizon, and you're like, is that a cloud? And then you're just like, oh shit, I need to paddle out. And it turns out that you're actually not out far enough nearly at all. And so rather than catching this huge set that rolls in, it just like totally like smashes you, right? And it's like basically, and the experience of being a sort of somewhat, when this happens, I don't think it's happening yet. I really don't.
Okay.
I really don't.
So you really don't think
they don't have the, it's like when you join traditionally in Japan, when you joined a Zen monastery, the way in which you would do that is you would go to the monastery and knock on the door, which is locked, which is always locked, and demand admission and pound on the door.
They say no, thank you. Come back.
No, they wouldn't say anything, actually, and you would just get tired, and you would be like, okay, I'm just going to sleep outside the door.
Okay.
With no tent or anything, right? And eventually, and it might be that they would just wait until you went away, right? I mean, they're watching you through a security camera, of course, but but the thing is, actually, when you come to them with the requisite level of humility, when you've basically lost all of your pride from the other world, you've given up your ego, and the thing is, basically, what is necessary for that moment of enlightenment. It could happen. It could be done. If Donald Trump himself were to become enlightened in this way, it would happen tomorrow. But it's a very difficult transition, especially it's a very difficult transition. But the thing is, when you basically, for them to dissolve the deep state would require them to abandon all of their pride in a way that they're not ready for yet.
Is it a question of capacity or will to power or understanding how to do it or willingness to do it?
It is a question
of
spiritual enlightenment. They're not ready in spirit to do that. They're not ready to there's too much pressure, there's too much hunger, there's too much desire. They're not sort of ready to kind of find that still point that like turns around itself.
Right.
The Tao is not yet strong enough in them. Right. But it's much stronger. It's actually, even though people expect much less, it's in a way, it's much stronger in them than in 2016. Trying way too hard.
And not hard enough.
And nowhere near hard enough.
That's right.
But also in terms of their levels of intelligence, if you were to compare them with the founding fathers, for instance, where would you rate their level?
Oh, Elon Musk is, of course, very sure, totally fine. But the thing is, Elon Musk, you have to understand that one of the things about the founders' generation, all of these people are deeply educated in like the classical world. Like Elon Musk basically is a product of modern education. He doesn't know anything about the world except the world he's seen with his own eyes. And so, he basically...
He's not read as Seneca.
He's not read as Seneca. No. Not even Mark Zuckerberg, who idolizes repeatedly Augustus, is read as...
Maybe Barron Trump is going to be memed into being like this philosopher king, because it seems like, at least online, a lot of people...
I was thinking about Barron Trump the other day, and, he's a blank slate on which you can project anything because he's just a random royal, basically. But, I want to see him as, like, the Fade Routha of the Trump administration, right? Just really, like...
And he's going to NYU. Why would you send that kid to NYU? What kind of education do you think he's going to get at NYU?
He's got to be immersed in liberal America. He's got to, just as, Gaddafi immersed his son in, Oxford.
Yeah, he'll take
exactly the same thing.
In Dimes Square. And,
he needs to come to Dimes. He needs to come to Sov House. He needs to, plow, a wide swath through the art hose, right? Basically, if you're an art ho and you don't, have Barron Trump in 4 years, if you're an art ho and if you don't have Barron Trump on your resume, what are you doing? Right, and I'd say maybe you hit the wall, right? That's but the thing is, should be a thing, obviously, right? He's got to wallow in the modern world to come out as it's like a Henry V thing, right?
Siddhartha. Siddhartha goes
Henry
off.
V. There's a hero's journey here. He'll be one-shotted on ayahuasca. He'll come back from that. All right, our first question is Barron Trump, would or wouldn't?
Would.
Why?
But, well,
Why?
well, he's too young.
No,
In 3 years.
No, just I don't like when men are younger than me.
Okay, in 4 years.
But still, we'll both progress, so he'll never be older than me.
Okay, what if when he's 27 and you're 29?
How old is he?
I'm not going to make aspersions about your age because I'm a gentleman, but okay, when he's a little older. No.
He's attractive and probably cool.
If you're watching this, Barron, should he shave his junk?
I think he's probably an autist.
Sick. Probably.
Right.
I don't know. Yeah, no, not for me. But if I was 18 right now, duh.
Duh.
Yeah.
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 Duh.
Yeah.
Duh. If you're a liberal, not even a libertine, but just a liberal, if they're two consenting adults,
Yes. Absolutely.
they can do whatever they want.
Absolutely.
And that used to be a liberal value.
Well,
except liberals aren't liberals anymore.
but it's funny that it's presented as feminist because it's actually completely taking away female agency.
Sure.
When it's she couldn't have consented to this because he has more power than her.
Because she's
he's
23
older than her.
and he's
It's
50, yeah.
Fuck off. You can't tell me as a woman who I can and cannot fuck.
Well,
And
the
call
HR
it-
department can and tries to.
It is this damsel in distress kind of mentality where the woman is not able to, make up her mind as far as who she wants to be with.
Yeah.
So in a way, they want to take care of her and make sure that she doesn't make any bad decisions. Like
They're
with
just like
drinking,
little
for instance.
babies.
Yeah, I remember back in, 2015, there were these girls I knew who just started going to college and they started posting about how horrible it is that, men and women, they go out, they get drunk and then they have
And
sex.
fuck,
And it's,
yeah. It's puritanical,
Puritanical's right. That's right.
It's actually, it's puritanical, low-key misogyny wrapped up in feminism
100%.
packaging.
And this entire whatever we want to call it, Yashaman calls it the identity synthesis. This gentleman calls it gay race communism. I'll call it identitarian third worldist, tongue twister, academic.
The Daily Wire calls it wokeness.
Yeah,
Well, it's the
wokeness.
inverse of will to power. It's victimization
puritanical.
as
It's American Puritanism.
power.
100%.
Nietzsche's rolling in his grave.
There was also this idea, I don't remember who said it, but that our current woke regime is a side effect of the American Protestantism having a kind of, I wouldn't say it's schism necessarily, but having a lot of these American Protestants who want to be so good and so heroic, thinking what is more heroic than selling out my own civilization, than showing how good I am by destroying everything that actually makes this whole thing work for the sake of those who are not good as good as I am.
Oh, sure. I mean, you can see this in like shitlib, attitudes even in the 19th century toward, Native Americans. Basically, they would like do like some like scalping thing or some other beastly atrocity, and then the frontier whites who were basically, only like half a standard deviation above the Neanderthal would be like, we're going to wipe them out and scalp them too, and like kill the babies and eat them because they killed our babies and ate them. And, the like nice ladies of Boston were like, wow, you can't kill babies and eat them, right? And that like dynamic was going on, basically throughout, not just the 19th century.
This is a Christian heresy. This is American.
Heresy, that's the word, yeah.
This is an American Puritanism. This is an eschatology. This is
But
a
if you want to
mutation.
find pure-blooded shitlibs in the 19th century, you can find them, and they're all like Boston Protestants.
Boston Brahmin.
Yeah.
Annoying ladies who lunch.
They did, those annoying ladies did something really, really good for the Russian people, which their government did not do. There
the
was a
Russian
mass.
people.
Hold on, no, not
Sorry.
the hell. Here's the thing. There was a mass starvation going on within the Russian Empire, like at the late 19th century.
The Russian Empire did nothing wrong.
The Americans.
What? Can I just lift up my sock?
Yeah.
Can I just lift up for the audience at home?
All right. It's true. It's true. When I said the Russian Empire did nothing wrong, they could have done a better job of teaching everybody Russian. But sorry.
This is the thing that you said that most upsets me. I have to tell you.
Anyway, Lev, go
Rape
on.
jokes, none of that. This is what upsets me. Let the lady talk.
All those like imperial connected merchants back then within Imperial Russia, they had all these stores of grain that they could have used to feed their own people. Instead, they were selling it off while people were starving, in Russia and Ukraine and all that stuff. So it was the Americans.
Fashion grain hoarding narrative, and these merchants, these merchants that you mentioned who were doing this grain hoarding. These were Russian merchants of Russian descent.
Yes, connected with the royal family.
Connected with the royal family and of
Yes.
pure
Russian blood.
descent.
Yes,
pure Russian, not just Russian.
European. The aristocracy of Russia. Like the Tsar of Russia, for instance, Nicholas II, he was the cousin, I believe, of the King of England at the time. So
They're all German, man. They're all fucking German.
yeah, they were German.
I just said I'm glad that Russia created Chekhov. That's all.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I agree.
But,
And Tchaikovsky.
We're all Chekhov respecters here. By the way, Russian, not a Jew, as I understand it. Chekhov. Yeah.
It's true.
What I was gonna say is like all the like libtard shit. Like it also like the new god in their Puritanism is like the marketplace in the sense that like it definitely encourages like atomization and isolation because it discourages connection between people, making you anxious about sex, anxious about being comfortable in your own body, and people supplement for having connections with people by like literally scrolling and instant gratification. Like I know it sounds gay, but like
It does sound gay.
and buying things.
It's lovely. It's not gay. It's lovely.
A lot more
No, it
pornography
is gay.
consumption and a lot less sex as far as the Zoomers are concerned.
Yeah.
Not that there's anything wrong with that.
No, well, there's a lot more, and frankly, there's a lot more just like, cuckoldry. And, if I were president, I'd kind of take a firm stand on this. I've, been, one of my problems with Substack actually is that there isn't like a merch tab that's automatic, but I really want to, I want to sell, t-shirts that are in the same font as like keep calm and carry on. But instead it would just say, be your own bull.
With a V.
With a B, with a V, of course, with a V. Yeah. But like that's the message that I thought pride that young American men, should have. They should be able to go up to their woman and say, "I am my own bull."
Happening on like Passage Press, for instance, and publications like that. Our great patron, Spectral Valkyrie, she has a quote over here from Wyndham Lewis. Quote, as a result of the feminist revolution, feminine becomes an abusive epithet.
Right. Feminine men run
the
Norwegian Defense Ministry.
That's right.
Feminine men.
These men are not their own bull.
Right.
Yeah.
And women want that, but they don't want to admit that they want a man who is like that.
Dominates them and
Yeah.
Is that for the sake of keeping the peace? Like, for example, a friend of mine talks about how all the girls at work, they don't talk about the fact that there's like these third world migrants that are populating, the streets they're walking around and peeing in public and doing all that bad stuff. Not that they're not aware that that's happening, but they're afraid of causing a fuss. They're afraid of causing something that would disrupt some kind of a internal harmony that may be going around in the office. What do you think, Cassidy, would it take to break that spell? Like, how bad does it have to get?
It's not about how bad, because if it was about how bad, it would already have happened.
Are they excited at all? These women by the frisson?
Yes, because their men around them at the bars don't do it anymore because they're scared.
That's right. But these husky third worlders, just they're insolent. They're very forward, and they
It's hot. When a man is forward, it's hot. Sorry,
yeah.
It pisses me off because I don't want to make the first move. I'm a girl. I shouldn't make the first move. I don't want to do that.
You shouldn't have to.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's actually kind of like.
Well, I mean, this is a point made by Camille.
Rude.
This is a point made by Camille Paglia long ago that basically in the kind of in the mating rituals of human universal of Homo sapiens, like male transgression of boundaries is basically the kind of core statement. You have sometimes we get a female indication of interest, right? But that's relatively subtle compared to the male violation of boundaries, which is basically sexual harassment is actually part of human reproduction.
Right. Exactly right.
Ambiguity is sexy.
100%. And this is very important. So basically what happens with this sexless ideology is that the HR department kind of chills any kind of sexual relations within the workplace at all.
Lust.
Yeah.
At all, because you have to be now. If you're a man, you have to be a total fucking idiot or self-destructive or not care about your job to come on to anybody at all.
Right.
Because if your come on is unwanted, it's just sexual harassment a priori. And of course, vicious sexual harassment does exist, and what happens is that mating and sexual relations leaves the workplace and it goes onto the phone.
And it goes onto the phones, and it becomes almost entirely online.
Right.
And it becomes a sort of sorted online transaction.
People do not meet their spouses anymore at work as they did in the 50s and 60s.
So here's a question from Paul Boring. Interesting name. Dear Curtis Yarvin, Africa imports over 80% of its calories from outside the continent.
Ukraine, motherfuckers.
It is going through a population explosion. What is the future of this continent?
Wow. What is the future of this continent? Interesting question. I would say that, from the perspective of human rights, I think that we seem to be able to produce this food by having the Ukrainians, slave away while under, Russian artillery fire or whatever they're doing. So the grain is there. We could think about combining it with maybe some contraceptives that would be like at the flour processing stage. That's one certainly approach that could be considered.
Not talking morals here. We're just talking straight.
Yeah, just as an objective, perspective. Basically, I don't think that living in this kind of way is really great, and I think that what you really have to consider is nobody wants to live in a slum in Lagos, right? Yeah. But they do, and the ability to say, for example, if you have the kind of an Elon Musk level of energy, the ability to say, hey, there's 9 million people living in the slums in Lagos. It's not a good existence. It takes a lot of grain to sustain. And if we could sort of move that into a very well self-contained arcology, if you're familiar with the term arcology.
I played SimCity 2000.
Same level of grain inputs. And the thing is, basically, in terms of the human need for meaning to experience the world, what's cool about that is basically Apple Vision Pro. Right. And so actually one of the things that it's possible to do is sort of restore the balance of nature to this incredible content. Africa by offering basically a kind of super Manhattan project, if you will, to offer everyone in Africa a better, safer, more controlled life, basically in some kind of solar panel covered arcology that's just like grain goes in, out, and like grain goes in and shit goes out, kind of closed ecosystem. And then their experience of like all of the fascinating and varied things that life has to offer is primarily through virtual
reality.
Isn't there a fear of this becoming like the mouse utopia experiment?
No, because the thing is, you'd actually want to customize that environment so that it included things like danger and difficulty, and so you wouldn't just be a boring room full of, you'd be like living inside a video game.
So literally the Matrix for...
Yeah, but that video game should include danger, it should include pain.
Sexual pleasure,
sex, death, all of these things, right? And the thing is...
Your wife's friends coming on to you during the war and then denying it.
That's right. All of these things, right? And if it includes all of these human experiences, including death, Palmer Luckey, of course, famously built, the Oculus in which if you die in the game, you die in real life. Right. And so I think there's something there, because the thing is, we have this enormous human population. And if you basically, put them in situations where they can experience danger, which is a human need, really, it's like read Ernst Junger's, Storm of Steel. You'll see like the necessity of battle as a human experience. You can't necessarily produce this for people living in an arcology, but you can fake it in VR. And then when they lose, basically, there's like, you've seen like No Country for Old Men, there's like the bolt gun thing, like when they lose the game, when they run out of hit points, it's like blam. But that's not the way it ends, because actually out of their death comes life, because then they can be organ donors. Right. And so actually you're seeing, first of all, this simulated environment provides the things that they need to live a meaningful life as human beings. And then, at the end of that life, they can save 5, 6, 7, 8 lives of like old Jewish ladies in West Palm Beach who will get like new...
You're like spreading anti-Semitism faster than Hezbollah, I have to tell you at this point.
Pro-Semitism. These women should get new hots.
You're like if you like this
You're a caring woman, right? Yeah. They put a lot of mileage on those hots. They've answered a lot of appeals. They've given money to the ACLU.
Oh my God.
Now the hot is wearing out. They should get a new one.
I know this kind of sounds like me being a hippie cuck for a second here, but I don't know about separating people away from, Mother Earth over here and just keeping them in some VR landscape. If there is some...
Have you used Apple Vision Pro? The resolution is exquisite. And it's only going to get better. It's going to go 4K to 8K.
No, but what about the vitamins that you need from sunlight?
Inject them.
Okay. What about like muscle tone, losing mass?
You need a whole VR assisted workouts. Like, you're working hard in this space, right? You might even be doing like teleoperation stuff. Yeah. Exactly. It's like Avatar. Of course, there's sexuality. I'm not saying there's no sexuality. We're not going to go into this is a family podcast. So we won't go into the details, right? But like, can you penetrate? Can you be penetrated? Right. Of course. Right. The full human experience is available. But the thing is,
That's so expensive, though. Why not just give them better lives?
In terms of technology, AI will solve this, right? In terms of contaminating the pristine ecosystem of Africa with its megafauna, just think of the swamps, the like thousands of glittering flamingos,
the
rising
gazelles, which are like super deer,
the beautiful predators, the snakes even, right? And then when you have this like cancer of exponentially growing humanity fed on grain from Minnesota and the Ukraine, right? It basically like it's gross, right? But the thing is basically that you can
What about romanticism? What about the human condition? What about Keats.
As soon as the human
and
condition,
Byron.
once the resolution on those Apple displays gets to like real Retina, like that is
There's
the
no
human
difference.
condition.
You're
There's
saying
no difference.
you're saying the simulation that I'm playing here, I just happen to be a better.
Even the children grow up in it. You have these like baby-sized Apple Vision Pros, right? And they live richly, right? Even though they're actually like very economic for the world to support, because it's just one device, right? They live. It's a very rich existence.
So why don't we just? Why stop racializing this? Why don't we just put our own?
Did I racialize it?
Oh, we get.
No,
why
it's
do-
using the word mass, not specifically like any.
No.
Yeah.
This is the new safety net
for
for the
everyone.
world.
for everybody, for poor
For
people
everybody.
everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, except,
Very,
but like you and I will continue going through the world, and
We have an aristocratic mien in some ways, but of course, if you fail as an aristocrat, you can end up back in the.
We have a comment over here. So first from Spectral Valkyrie, our great patron, Spectral
Wow.
Valkyrie. She says over here, drink milk. It has vitamin D, silly.
Wow. Is she trans? It's kind of a trans name.
No, I think it's just okay. Here, new question from Ryan Lasik, who by the way just became a patron yesterday when he found out that you were on. So cheers.
That's LASIK is in the eye surgery.
Yes, exactly. He comes from the LASIK family. So here,
Exactly.
Dear Curtis, aka John Law, your last post on Bitcoin was in 2023. Since then, ETFs got improved, and it's a Republican campaign issue. Any updated thoughts? Sincerely, a disturbance patrician.
Well, yeah. I mean, this is a fan of my writing about Bitcoin from 2005, before there was Bitcoin. That is not to say I'm Satoshi. I'm not Satoshi. Okay, let's make that clear. But point that essentially the Trump election has removed a lot of the last chances for the powers that be to like really stand in the way of monetary restandardization, as I've been calling it for 20 years, is that's certainly, I think, worthy of notice. These are not financial predictions, of course, of any kind. But really, yeah.
What do you see, by the way, going on with El Salvador and their Bitcoin-related projects?
who cares?
I care.
Well, it's a small country. It's, what do I see going on? Well, I visited. I've been there twice actually. And the first time I was there, it was a thing on it's a palestra thing on the water actually, and I swam in the water, and I was there for 3 days, and I don't know if this is because of my beach trip or what, but I had actually in 3 days I had 2, I believe, separate very severe intestinal infections. And right after the second one, I was flying directly to Amsterdam on a KLM flight. I don't know if you fly KLM. There's a KLM airline out there somewhere with a bathroom that I believe needs to be decontaminated like more seriously than like probably they usually do.
They have a code sharing with Air France.
Yeah, well,
they never
if you were unlucky enough to use that bathroom, you'll share something. And so that was that. I think that colored my view of El Salvador. But on the other hand, you can walk around. I walked around with a laptop in my hand, a naked laptop, in like the old center of El Salvador, and I felt perfectly safe with that. So
I mean, that still keeps going. Not that I want to get too contentious over here, but it does flow into the idea of, well, how long would these dictators be able to be benevolent before they start getting a little bit iffy? Will Bukele eventually become a tyrant, or do you think like he can keep his head
how would you
cool?
say that applies to, say, the Bourbon family?
Well, I don't know. I mean,
When did the Bourbons succeed the Valois? Is that the war of the? That's not the war of the Spanish succession. It's way earlier than that.
way earlier.
My point is, you're over-indexing on the 20th century. Don't over-index on the 20th century.
Yeah.
Like, really.
well, one thing related to the 20th century that I want to make sure we don't skip over, just in brief, we were talking about 1989. Does today's situation remind you in a way, like as far as, and yes, Vlad, I'm dragging us just a wee bit into the whole Russia-Ukraine thing. I have to just say one thing there. Does it remind you of 1939? And who would you see Trump being in this situation? Like, would he be Roosevelt, who didn't want to help Britain until Pearl Harbor? Or any thoughts on that? And then we can move on from that.
I think that, comparing the present to the past in an age of decline always basically brings up issues of comedy where it's hard to have a serious response. I can think of a number of different kinds of fundamentally comic responses to the question, but I think that you're looking for a serious response, and it's not clear to me that if that is at all possible, I'm capable of it. Vlad, are you capable of it?
I am capable of it. I am absolutely capable of it. I'm deeply concerned, as many Ukrainian patriots are, about Donald Trump, because we just don't know what he's going to do Ukraine. What we know is that the downward trajectory of the Ukraine-Russia war, in the way that it was a replay of the Iran-Iraq war of the 80s, which was 8.5 years and 1 million people dead on both sides, which ended with nothing. Like, neither side ended that war with any noticeable change.
Well, I think Saddam basically prevailed in that, but
because of later events, but the borders didn't change, the oil didn't change. Just a lot of very beautiful young men were killed, right? There was a future under the Obama, Harris, Biden regime of the same people in the State Department since 2009 and 10, which would have left Ukraine on the same general track of attrition against a very difficult opponent who has the same incapacity to stop, but 4 times the manpower and 10 times the economic base, and 18% of their economy in defense, and large swaths. Swath is the wrong word, but large reserves of the world's oil and gas, which is a very difficult opponent to win against, especially when it's an autocracy, when the population clearly doesn't give a shit about hundreds of thousands of their own young men being killed. The Russians lose something like 1,500 casualties a month in Ukraine now on their counteroffensives, and the Russian population doesn't care. And if you're Putin and the Putin regime, you can keep that going ad nauseum until you run out of Muslim young men in the provinces.
Yeah, I was going to say, I understand many of them are actually Chechens, so it's
Chechens, Dagestanis, Burats, all the ethnic minorities of Russia are fighting. Like, the number one name in the Russian field hospital in Rostov, where evacuate the Russian wounded, is Muhammad. That's who's fighting. Mohammeds are fighting.
What about the North Koreans?
Well, the North Koreans, okay, that's a good question. The North Koreans, and my friend Mark Aliati said this, the North Koreans put 20,000 infantry into Kursk. Okay, that's symbolic and that's important, but if you're losing 1,500 guys a day, that's a week and a half's worth of casualties. 10,000 North Korean infantry guys in Kursk is at the rate of, let's say, 1,000 guys a day. That's 10 days worth of casualties. Is that going to tip the conflict? No. So with the Trump thing, you have the conclusion of one possible thing, which I was in favor of, which is helping Ukrainians as much as possible to win an attrition war where they have to be more clever with weapons and drones and missile strikes and all this, into a new paradigm where Donald Trump will obviously try to make a deal. What that deal looks like is unpredictable and somewhat scary and full of unknown quantities and unknown
What
criteria.
are your predictions for what that deal looks like?
What, my predictions?
Yeah.
Look, I talk to his guys and our guys all day long. Basically, they're going to put pressure on both the Russians and the Ukrainians to end this. They're going to tell the Russians, if you don't do this, we're going to give the Ukrainians everything. We're going to give them everything short of nukes, and they will fuck you in the backside. And then they'll go to the Ukrainians and they'll probably tell them, you don't cut it off right now, I'm going to stop giving you anything at all. So you're going to say 2 different things to Moscow and Kiev.
Why is that terrifying?
Why is that terrifying? Because we don't know which one of those things will actually happen. It's
Maybe
50-50.
Maybe they will just both fuck off.
They won't, because it's an existential conflict for both sides. With the Ukrainians, if we stop fighting, it's over for the Ukrainian nation. For the Kremlin regime, if they stop fighting, it's The Hague or death or coup d'etat for Putin.
So I want to hear, what is your take on if there is a potential deal in Ukraine? Because I have my own conception of it, but what happens to the sort of like propped up power that Zelensky has, as far as let's say that there is some sort of ideal world where there is, well, I don't know about ideal, but like world where there's like a settlement, in the conflict.
Fine.
My sort of assumption is that the powers that are backing Zelensky will immediately back away, and Zelensky will fold, and there'll be a new sort of hard right, sort of Hungary on steroids power in the Ukraine.
Okay, so lovely. What happens is that first of all, let's go back to how that would happen. The Ukrainians will not stop fighting for a land for peace deal, because if they stop fighting, the Russians rearm faster and rebuild faster than they do. So any ceasefire, as opposed to settlement, works much better for Moscow than it does for Kiev. So Kiev has no incentive whatsoever to stop fighting without security guarantees. Those security guarantees are famously hard to give. The deal that everyone's talking about most likely is what's known as a West Germany minus, which means NATO security guarantees with peacekeepers for Ukrainian territory that is being held by the Ukrainians, which means Polish troops, maybe American troops, maybe not, probably not with the Trump administration. So we're assuming that the Ukrainians are told to fold and the Russians take their gains and they announce victory, and the Ukrainians get what's called a West Germany minus deal, which means NATO guarantees for some places, not others, with a, let's say, 50, 60, 70 year moratorium. I'm talking about Crimea. Some places will be annexed. Other places we're just going to fudge the difference. We're not going to talk about it. Let's say that happens. What would happen is that the Ukrainians would have elections, and Zelensky would promptly lose those elections. And General Zaluzhny, who's now ambassador to London, would promptly become the president of Ukraine, with possibly Poroshenko as a prime minister, most likely outcome, which is what they want. And in that case,
who's that? The Ukrainians?
The Poroshenko Zaluzhny faction, not the Ukrainians. All the polling shows that the population of Ukraine loves Zelensky and is happy that he did this, but is willing to let him go in the way that the Brits let Churchill go in 1945, right? Thank you for your service. We'd like to try something else now. There will be elections. It is a liberal democracy. And in that situation, Zelensky and Yermak will go home, and Zaluzhny or some other general will come to power. And you're going to have a parliament half filled with former soldiers and officers and half filled with Soros-type NGO characters. So that's what's going to happen.
I guess my question was, we talked briefly about characters in World War II and who we would equate Trump to, whether it would be Roosevelt or others. In my opinion, I see Trump as more of a Bismarck character, a foreign policy sort of Stresemann-like, where he's trying to keep the peace between multiple factions
and classes.
At the same time, you've got, growing inflation, growing deficit, potential for a recession. Obviously, nothing in history repeats itself, but in some instances it rhymes. I guess what's your take, given that he represents sort of this
comparing
bridge?
Trump to Bismarck is sort of remarkable. It's sort of like comparing, like Michael Jordan, I improvise a lot. I guess, I don't know, in terms of the character of Trump is interesting, but, to compare anyone in the 21st century to a 19th century statesman is, I think, it's just not really a fair comparison. Mm-hmm. It's no, I don't think I could score on Jordan. I don't think I could fight with Tyson, and
Can I say that there's one thing that comparison I think is really reasonable and valid on, is that, like Bismarck, Donald Trump will hopefully, and that this is part of the propaganda for him, make a deal between various classes of a society in a Bismarckian way. Bismarck came up with the idea that the Junkers, the bankers, the merchants, the middle class, and the workers have a working alliance. And that is something that, including giving up universal health care to the working class and giving pensions, which the Bismarckian regime invented. So in that sense, but only in that sense.
Certainly both very, very thymotic. I might compare him more to Marky Mark. But, sorry. Sorry, horrible.
But I think trying to compare Bismarck and German Imperial Juncker politics with the industry and the heavy and the World War I and all this to America in 2024, 25 is not useful. But that kernel of what you're talking about is like a new deal between the various classes in America fighting with each other being a positive thing, and Trump representing both reindustrialization and the working class, which has been ignored for so long by like an annoying, obnoxious upper middle class elite, represented by an annoying, obnoxious Democratic Party with its scolding. That's a real insight that you've hit on.
Yeah, it's like comparing Vlad to a porn star. I mean, the ambition is there, the predilection is there, the performance we don't really know, but there's the same energy, right?
There's same energy,
and
angel on the streets, devil in the sheets.
Angel on the streets, devil in the sheets.
And with that, we're almost finished. Yeah. Any quick words on JD Vance? Any thoughts on JD Vance? Then we're really good to go. That's the final.
He loved the beard.
There we go. Guys, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. A big round of applause. There we go. And a big round of applause to our wonderful patrons and friends over here. We are live.
To our friend Lev, our great host.
To Lev.
Convener of men and women and friends.
Everybody is brought together in New York City, the BTR NYC studios. We're making it happen. We've got a rooftop. We're going to go to the rooftop after this. Guys, $20 patronage gives you this. Patreon.com/breaktherules. Become a patron today, and we are going to see you later.